It didn't leak through rumor or memo. It hit like a grenade. A single line on the DOJ wire. Lindsey Halligan sworn in as U.S. Attorney, Eastern District of Virginia. At first, nobody flinched. Just another Trump appointment, right? Wrong. Within 72 hours, the Justice Department's internal chat rooms went silent. James Comey, indicted. Letitia James, indicted. Yeah, you heard that right. The former FBI director who opened the Russia probe and the New York Attorney General who sued Trump's empire, both now defendants under Trump's newly installed prosecutor. Insiders called it the night of the long knives. Career lawyers started locking office doors, shredding notes, avoiding eye contact. One official described it bluntly: the department is eating itself. Here's the kicker. This isn't just about Trump's enemies. It's about his ownership of American justice. To understand this explosion, you have to go back to where it started. The day Trump returned to Washington with a list, not a plan. He'd told allies for months he wanted a Justice Department that finally listens. Translation, a Justice Department that obeys. And that's where Lindsey Halligan enters the frame. A former Trump defense lawyer from Florida. No record as a prosecutor, no Senate confirmation hearing, but fierce loyalty. That was her credential. According to the Wall Street Journal, her appointment bypassed normal vetting. The announcement came late Friday night, buried between shutdown updates and foreign policy chatter. Inside DOJ, veterans read the name twice. Eastern District of Virginia, the EDVA, the same office that handled WikiLeaks, CIA leaks, and major national security cases, the crown jewel of the department. Within days, senior prosecutors were reassigned. Sources told Vanity Fair that Halligan brought in her own circle, aides from Trump's campaign legal team, even a former Mar-a-Lago lawyer known for combative TV appearances. The message was clear: loyalty first, law later. And then came the strikes. First target, James Comey. The indictment accused him of lying to Congress and obstructing a proceeding linked to his 2017 testimony on classified documents. The same testimony that triggered Trump's first outburst as president. Comey's a liar and a leaker. Second target, Letitia James, the New York Attorney General who dismantled the Trump Organization's finances. The charges? Abuse of authority, misuse of state power, and, in a twist, civil rights violations against a private citizen, Trump himself. It wasn't subtle, it was personal. The morning after the indictments dropped, every major network carried the same headline: Trump's prosecutor launches a political purge. The reaction was instant. Democrats called it the death of DOJ independence. Republicans? Divided. Half cheered the long-delayed accountability. The other half stayed quiet, afraid of what it might unleash. Behind closed doors, attorney Pam Bondi tried to project control. Cameras caught her walking into a closed Senate briefing, stone-faced. But leaks from inside said morale at Main Justice had cratered. One official described the mood as 1984 with subpoenas. Halligan herself remained silent. No press conferences, no leaks, just sealed motions and grand jury subpoenas. The Wall Street Journal reported she was bypassing senior DOJ review, routing indictments directly through hand-picked magistrates. One anonymous career lawyer said she's building a parallel Justice Department inside the Justice Department. Think about that. A private legal network running inside the federal system, led by someone who once defended Trump personally. That's not normal. That's revolutionary. Cable networks turned it into political theater. Trump praised her at a rally in Michigan. Finally, a prosecutor with backbone. Crowds roared. Meanwhile, former DOJ officials warned of a constitutional crisis. Adam Schiff tweeted, "When loyalty becomes law, democracy dies." Rand Paul countered, "If Comey lied, he should face the same justice he demanded for others." The split wasn't ideological anymore. It was existential. Is justice still blind, or is it wearing a red tie? Inside DOJ, resistance brewed. Reports surfaced of senior officials drafting resignation letters. One deputy allegedly told colleagues, "We swore an oath to the Constitution, not a man." But resigning meant surrendering the department entirely to Trump's people. So many stayed, documenting, leaking, waiting. And that's when the real pressure began. Halligan ordered all internal communications reviewed for potential leaks. Staff were warned against talking to the media. Even routine meeting notes were suddenly classified. The department that once prided itself on transparency now looked more like an occupied building. Meanwhile, conservative media framed Halligan as a reformer, a disruptor, cleaning house. Progressive outlets called her the Trump's legal hit woman. Two narratives, one reality. Chaos. The political fallout hit within 48 hours. Senator Dick Durbin demanded an emergency hearing. "We need to know who approved this appointment and under what authority." Bondi refused to appear. Republican leadership blocked the subpoena vote, arguing the president has full discretion over U.S. attorney appointments. Democratic operatives began floating impeachment talk, not for Trump, but for Bondi. They argued she allowed the department to be hijacked for personal vendetta. Meanwhile, conservative PACs launched ad campaigns portraying Comey and Letitia James as symbols of the old corruption. The narrative flicked from scandal to cleansing. Public opinion split right down the middle. Half the country believed Trump was finally striking back at the deep state. The other half believed he just turned America's justice system into a political weapon. And somewhere in the middle sat a question nobody wanted to answer. What happens when the Justice Department itself becomes the crime scene? Financial markets even trembled, foreign investors wary of institutional instability. European allies quietly questioned whether extradition treaties with the U.S. were still safe, fearing political prosecutions could taint cooperation. Legal analysts warned of constitutional rupture. The president can appoint prosecutors, but can he direct who they prosecute? That's the fault line Halligan's actions have opened. Even some conservative judges whispered concern. One appellate jurist was overheard saying, "We're testing boundaries that held for 2 centuries." But here's the part nobody's talking about. What happens if this actually goes forward? If these cases reach trial? If Comey testifies under oath again, this time as the accused? If Letitia James walks into federal court wearing the same expression she once wore against Trump's attorneys? Because then the stakes aren't political anymore, they're systemic. And once that line is crossed, there's no coming back. If this goes forward, if the trials begin, then the United States will enter a phase no democracy has ever safely walked out of, when the justice system prosecutes its own former guardians. Think about it. James Comey was once the face of institutional integrity, the man who stood up to presidents, briefed Congress, and claimed to protect the Bureau's independence. Now he's being led into court by a prosecutor handpicked by the very man he once investigated. That's not irony. That's poetic vengeance dressed as justice. And Letitia James? She's more than a state attorney general. She's the symbol of accountability that cornered Trump's empire. Her civil case stripped the Trump organization of credibility, forcing fines, bans, and audits that humiliated his inner circle. Now, Trump's camp calls this balance. But for millions of Americans watching, it looks like retribution wearing the mask of law. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Both sides see this as survival. For Trump and his allies, this isn't about one indictment. It's a test case, proof that his presidency can rewrite the rules of accountability. For Democrats and DOJ veterans, it's a moral last stand. If they let this pass, if they normalize it, they fear the Justice Department will never again be a neutral arbiter. A senior DOJ official told Vanity Fair anonymously, "This is how democracies slide, not with a coup, but with compliance." Every move Halligan makes now is under the microscope. Her office has reportedly seized communications between former FBI officials tied to the early Russia probe, and even some from Mueller's team. Insiders say she's pushing for retroactive accountability on what Trump once called the witch hunt hoax.
But the bigger story isn't in the court filings. It's in the hallways of Main Justice, where silence is now the loudest sound. Career attorneys whisper that this is the McCarthy era for lawyers. If you question the orders, you're replaced. If you leak, you're investigated. If you resign, you're branded disloyal. Yeah, you heard that right. The Justice Department, the institution meant to shield democracy from political influence, now runs on fear. And Trump, he's enjoying every second. At rallies, he smiles when the crowd chants, "Lock them up." He doesn't have to say it anymore. His prosecutors are already doing it. If this sounds familiar, it should. In 1973, Nixon fired the special prosecutor investigating him, the infamous Saturday Night Massacre. It triggered resignations, outrage, and eventually Nixon's downfall. But here's the difference. Nixon tried to stop an investigation into himself. Trump has gone a step further. He's created investigations into his enemies. And that's a darker precedent. It's not obstruction, it's inversion. The system isn't being blocked, it's being weaponized. Compare it to the McCarthy hearings of the 1950s. The same language echoes today. Enemies of the state, traitors, deep state operatives. Back then, the damage was reputational. Careers were destroyed. Today, it's legal, with indictments, subpoenas, and trials that can alter history books. The question now isn't who's guilty, it's who controls guilt. And that right there is the core of this crisis. Because once political power can define who the villain is, the Constitution becomes a set of suggestions.
Trials move forward. Comey and Letitia James are arraigned. Media circus ensues. Trump frames it as justice delayed. If either is convicted, even on minor procedural counts, the precedent is catastrophic. Any future president will have license to criminally retaliate against political enemies. The world watches, and America's moral authority fractures. Courts strike back. Federal judges, perhaps even Trump-appointed ones, rule Halligan's actions unconstitutional. Cases dismissed, DOJ forced into damage control, Bondi under investigation for political interference. It would be a short-term victory for democracy, but it might also ignite Trump's base, turning him into a martyr of accountability. Civil unrest? Possible. Political violence? Likely. Internal revolt. Sources suggest senior DOJ figures are already drafting coordinated resignations. If enough prosecutors walk out, it would paralyze the department, triggering emergency congressional hearings. Trump would call them traitors. Democrats would call them heroes. Either way, the DOJ as we know it would not survive intact. And lurking under all of this is the 2026 midterms. Republicans will campaign on restoring fairness. Democrats on defending the rule of law. The DOJ, once above politics, will be the main character in the most polarized election in modern history. Here's what few are saying out loud. The Halligan episode isn't an isolated abuse. It's a blueprint. Trump is testing how far he can bend institutions without breaking them. And every time no one stops him, the next bend gets easier.
It's the same playbook he used with the intelligence community, the military chain of command, and now the courts. Each move chips away at public trust until people no longer believe in the idea of neutrality. When that happens, justice isn't decided by facts, but by tribes. And that's how empires die, not in chaos, but in consent. When people get used to it, when they shrug and say, "That's just politics now." So let me ask you this. Is this accountability or is it vengeance? When a president can order prosecutions of those who once investigated him, is that justice or dictatorship with better branding? You decide. Because history won't remember the lawyers or the filings. It'll remember what the country accepted. When we let loyalty become law, the republic begins to fade quietly, not with gunfire, but with signatures and silence. So watch closely. Because if this DOJ Civil War keeps spreading, the next courtroom won't just hold Trump's enemies, it might hold the future of American democracy itself. Like, share, and subscribe, because this story isn't ending here. It's only beginning.